The late afternoon sun filtered through the rustling leaves of the old-growth oak that marked the true corner of his property, cast long shadows across the lawn. Elias Vance knelt, his hands deep in the cool, dark earth, tamping soil around the base of the last of a dozen young arborvitae saplings. They were small, barely waist-high, but they represented a promise, a living fence of green that would one day afford him the privacy his late wife, Helen, had always cherished. It was a good feeling, the honest ache in his back and the scent of freshly turned dirt. A clipped, unnaturally resonant voice shattered the quiet. "Those are lovely, Elias." Elias didn't need to look up to know who it was. The voice belonged to Carol Shaw, president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association, and it carried the practiced authority of someone who believed her opinion was an enforceable statute. He slowly straightened, brushing soil from his worn jeans, and turned. She stood just on the edge of the manicured common area that bordered his lot, a perfect ribbon of HOA-approved fescue. Beside her, a much younger man in a polo shirt bearing the logo of Aspire Community Management clutched a tablet, his expression a careful study in neutrality. Carol, however, was anything but neutral. She was a portrait of suburban power-tailored linen trousers, a sun hat with a brim wide enough to land a drone on, and a thin, unsmiling mouth. Her gaze wasn't on him, but on the row of saplings. Her eyes, magnified slightly by her designer sunglasses, scanned them like a building inspector hunting for code violations. "Simply lovely," she repeated, the word lovely now sounding like an indictment. "But they do appear to be encroaching on the community's scenic easement. You'll be hearing from us." The management agent tapped silently on his tablet, his face impassive. It was a quiet, almost theatrical moment of public humiliation. Several neighbors, out for their evening power walks, slowed their pace, their curiosity piqued by the sight of the HOA president in a standoff with the neighborhood's resident outlier. Elias felt a familiar flush of heat crawl up his neck. He had lived on this land for 40 years, in a house his father had built with his own hands, long before the first Oak Haven Estates model home had broken ground. Yet, in Carol's eyes, he was the encroacher. Elias ran a hand over his silver hair. As a retired civil engineer, he understood boundaries better than most. He knew with geodetic certainty where his property ended and the common area began. These trees were a good 3 feet inside his line. "Carol," he said, his voice calm and measured, "these are well within my property line. I checked the survey markers myself before I started digging." Carol offered a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "The association's plat maps are quite clear. Elias, the view corridor is a significant asset to the community. We have a duty to protect it." She gestured vaguely toward the distant, hazy hills, as if his 12-inch saplings were a redwood forest blocking a priceless vista. The agent, without looking up from his screen, added in a monotone, "The governing documents are clear on this matter. Any plantings that obstruct a designated scenic easement are subject to review by the Architectural Control Committee." "I'll be sure to send them a postcard when the trees are tall enough to obstruct anything," Elias replied, a dry edge to his tone. Carol's smile tightened. She turned to the agent, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that carried perfectly in the still air. "Make a note. Tim, potential violation of CC&R Section 8.4.2. Document with photographs and initiate the standard notification procedure." She then turned back to Elias, her performance complete. "Have a wonderful evening, Elias. Do enjoy your gardening." With a final, dismissive nod, she pivoted and strode away, the agent trailing in her wake like a pilot fish, The walking neighbors picked up their pace, their gazes averted. The show was over. Elias was left standing alone by his row of fragile new trees. The scent of soil now mingled with the bitter tang of impending conflict. He looked from the saplings to the house his father built, and a grim resolve settled over him. This wasn't about a few feet of grass. It was about his home, and Carol Shaw had just declared war on it with a smile. Elias Vance's home was an island of analog history in a digital sea of new construction. It was a modest but solid brick and timber ranch, a testament to his father's careful craftsmanship. Inside, the walls were lined not with bland, builder-grade art, but with framed blueprints of bridges and municipal water systems, relics from Elias's 40-year career as an engineer. A profession he'd chosen because he liked things that were logical, precise, and built to last. In the center of the living room, above the stone fireplace, hung the most important document of all his father's original survey map of the property, hand-drawn in India ink on linen. Dated 1958, the property lines were stark and unambiguous. The surveyor's notes penned in elegant, looping cursive. It was more than a map. It was the deed to his heritage. He'd inherited the 2-acre lot and the house on it, the last remaining piece of what was once a much larger family holding. Now nibbled away by decades of suburban expansion, Oakhaven Estates was simply the latest, and most aggressive, incarnation of that sprawl. His life was quiet, ordered, and deeply intertwined with the memory of his wife. Helen had been the gardener, the one with the vision. It was she who had first sketched out the idea for a natural privacy screen along the eastern edge of their property, the side that now faced the judgmental windows of Oakhaven. A little green wall. Eli. She'd called it. Just for us. She had passed away 2 years ago, before they could ever plant it. The row of young arborvitae was his tribute. A promise kept. The thought that Carol Shaw was targeting the very ground Helen had planned to cultivate filled him with a cold, protective anger. Carol Shaw was, by all accounts, a force of nature, a top-selling real estate agent with the largest brokerage in the county. She had moved into Oakhaven 4 years prior and, through a combination of sheer willpower and procedural maneuvering, had taken control of the HOA board within a year. She ran the association with the same ferocious zeal she applied to selling houses. To Carol, the community was not a collection of homes. It was a portfolio of assets. Every unmowed lawn, every peeling shutter, every non-compliant basketball hoop was a direct threat to the collective property value and, by extension, her own commissions. Elias's property was her greatest frustration. It was too large, too rustic, and its owner too independent. His sturdy, well-maintained but unpainted wooden fence was an eyesore compared to the uniform white vinyl required by the HOA. The magnificent, sprawling oak tree in his yard dropped leaves onto the pristine common area. He was a bug in her carefully written code, an anomaly she was determined to correct. The scenic easement was her chosen weapon. It was a vaguely defined strip of land intended to preserve the view of the hills for the homes on the far side of the common area. In Carol's interpretation, that easement extended, conveniently, right where Elias was planting his tribute to Helen. Elias spent the week in a state of watchful waiting. He researched the HOA's governing documents online, downloading the massive PDF of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC&Rs. He read through the dense legalese, his engineer's mind parsing the convoluted sentences. He found Section 8.4.2 Maintenance of View Corridors. It was as vague as he'd suspected, prohibiting any structure or landscaping that materially obstructs a designated view. What constituted materially was, of course, left to the discretion of the Architectural Control Committee, a 3-person body appointed by and presided over by Carol Shaw. His anger was a low, simmering heat. This wasn't about a view. It was about control. It was about Carol making an example of him, the last holdout who refused to bend to her vision of suburban perfection. He spoke on the phone that night with his daughter, Julia, a third-year law student in a city 3 hours away. "Just be careful, Dad," she advised, her voice a soothing balm of pragmatism. "These HOA fights can get ugly. They live and die by their paperwork. Make sure you have yours in order." "My paperwork is a survey stake in the ground, Julie. It doesn't get more in order than that." "I know," she said gently. "But their version of in order is a line on a map they control. Don't underestimate how they can twist their own rules." Her words proved prophetic. A week after the confrontation, the mail carrier handed him a thin, green envelope that required his signature. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. The official opening salvo. Inside, on heavy letterhead embossed with the Aspire Community Management logo, was the notice of violation. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation. The letter formally cited CC&R February 8.4.2. It stated that his new landscaping, 1212, Thuja green giant saplings, had been installed within the designated scenic easement in violation of community rules. Photographs were referenced but not included. The language was cold, impersonal, and absolute. "You are hereby directed to cure this violation by removing the unapproved landscaping within 14 days from the date of this notice. Failure to cure the violation by the deadline of October 12th will result in the levying of monetary fines in the amount of $100 100 later per day until such time as the property is brought into compliance." Elias read the letter 3 times. The words unapproved landscaping felt like a personal insult to Helen's memory. The 14-day deadline, the threat of fines it was designed to shock and overwhelm. He set the notice down on his workbench, next to a schematic for a reinforced concrete abutment. The fight was no longer informal. It was official, documented, and it had a ticking clock. He picked up the phone and made an appointment with a licensed land surveyor for the following morning. If Carol Shaw wanted a war of paperwork, he would arm himself with facts. Elias believed in the power of reason. In his world, if you presented a logical argument backed by verifiable data, you could solve any problem. It was this faith that he carried with him, tucked into a leather portfolio alongside his father's old linen map and a freshly certified survey. As he walked into the Oak Haven Estates community clubhouse for the monthly board meeting, he had spent the intervening week preparing meticulously. The surveyor he hired, a no-nonsense professional named Marcus, had used GPS equipment to confirm what Elias already knew. The iron pin marking his property corner was exactly where it should be, and his new trees were a comfortable 38 inches on his side of the line. Marcus had produced a new, stamped survey map, a clean, modern document that perfectly corroborated his father's ink drawing from 1958. The clubhouse meeting room was sterile and unwelcoming, smelling faintly of air freshener and institutional carpet cleaner. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a flat, unflattering glow on the 5 board members seated at a long folding table. Carol Shaw sat in the center, a gavel and a monogrammed leather portfolio placed neatly before her. To her right sat Tim from the management company, his tablet at the ready. The other 3 members a nervous-looking accountant, a stern-faced woman Elias didn't recognize, and an elderly gentleman named Arthur Eddington seemed to shrink in Carol's presence. Elias had signed up for the homeowner forum, a 15-minute segment at the beginning of the meeting. When Carol called his name, her tone was one of weary tolerance. "The floor recognizes Elias Vance," she announced, as if granting him a great favor. Elias walked to the small lectern facing the board. He began calmly. introducing himself and stating the reason for his presence. "I'm here to address the notice of violation I received regarding landscaping on my property. I believe the notice was issued in error, based on an incorrect understanding of the property line." He opened his portfolio. "I have here a new, certified survey of my property, completed last week by a licensed professional." He laid the large, crisp map on the table in front of them. "As you can see, the new plantings are located entirely on my private lot, well outside the common area boundary." Carol did not look at the map. She didn't even glance down. Instead, she looked at Tim, who immediately spoke up. "Mr. Vance, the association's actions are based on the official plat map recorded with the community's governing documents. That is the map of record for all enforcement matters." "And where did that map come from?" Elias pressed, keeping his voice even. "Because the official plat map on file at the county recorder's office, the one that legally defines these properties, matches my survey. Not yours." A flicker of annoyance crossed Carol's face. "Our map, which was provided by the developer and is included in the CC&Rs every homeowner agrees to, is the only one that matters for internal governance. We are not relitigating the boundaries of the community." Elias. "I'm not asking you to," Elias countered. "I'm asking you to look at the facts. The violation claims an encroachment on a common area easement. This survey proves there is no encroachment. The violation is baseless." He saw Arthur Eddington, the elderly man at the end of the table, lean forward slightly, his brow furrowed with interest. He seemed to be the only one actually listening. The other two board members stared blankly, their cues clearly taken from their president. Carol leaned into her microphone. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a patronizing balm of condescension. "We appreciate you bringing your perspective, Elias. However, the Architectural Control Committee has reviewed the matter, and their determination stands. The notice is valid. You have until the 12th to cure the violation." She tapped her gavel lightly on the table. "Next on the agenda." Elicit felt a surge of disbelief, then a hot wave of anger. He had presented irrefutable, professional evidence, and she had dismissed it without a glance. It was a kangaroo court, a show trial. "So you're refusing to even consider evidence that contradicts your claim?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. Carol set her portfolio on the table, its clasp clicking shut with an air of finality. "The committee's decision is based on the plain language of the bylaws and the official maps. Elias. There's nothing further to discuss in this forum." She looked past him, to the next homeowner waiting to speak. "Mrs. Gable, you had a question about the holiday decoration guidelines." He was dismissed, just like that. As Elias packed his maps back into his portfolio, his hands trembling slightly with indignation. He caught Arthur's eye. The old man gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a look of weary apology in his eyes. It was a tiny gesture, but it told Elias everything he needed to know. This wasn't about a mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated abuse of power. He walked out of the sterile clubhouse and into the cool night air, the fluorescent hum replaced by the chirping of crickets. The reasonable man had been shown the door. It was time for the engineer to start digging for a different kind of data, the kind a bully like Carol couldn't ignore. The first fine notice arrived on October 13th, the day after the deadline expired. It was another crisp envelope from Aspire Management, this one containing a simple, computer-generated invoice for $100,000, citing failure to cure violation. Fef 2023-114. A new one arrived the next day, and the day after that. Elias started a file, placing each notice in a clear plastic sleeve inside a 3-ring binder. The growing stack of paper was a tangible measure of the HOA's relentless, Automated aggression. The fines were an annoyance, but it was the letter that arrived the following week that truly signaled the escalation. It came from the law firm of Thorne, Cunningham and Associates, the HOA's retained counsel. The language was far more severe, referencing state statutes and the association's legal right to place a lien on his property for unpaid fines and fees. The total now stood at $700, and the letter warned that legal costs would be added to his account. This, Elias knew, was the real threat. A lien could cloud his title, making it impossible to sell or refinance his home. In a worst-case scenario, the HOA could even attempt to foreclose. The thought was absurd. Yet, the cold, legalistic prose of the letter made it feel terrifyingly real. His nightly calls with Julia became strategy sessions. They're following their playbook. "Dad," she told him, her voice a steady presence in the growing storm. "Escalate with legal threats to scare you into compliance. Don't talk to their lawyers. Don't respond to them at all. Communicate only in writing with the board or the management company, and send everything certified mail. We need a perfect paper trail." Following her advice, Elias began his counteroffensive. He spent hours at his large drafting table. The binder of CC&Rs opened before him. Highlighters and sticky notes fanned out like a detective's evidence board. He reread every section, every clause, every tedious definition. He was hunting for a crack in their armor, a rule they had overlooked in their single-minded pursuit of him. And he found it, tucked away in the back, under a dense section titled General Provisions, was paragraph 12.1.5 Conflicts. It was a single, powerful sentence. In any discrepancy between the association's internally maintained maps or records and the official records filed with the county recorder's office, the official county records shall be deemed to prevail. He stared at the words, a slow grin spreading across his face. It was the kill switch. Carol had built her entire case on the supremacy of the HOA's developer-provided map. Their own rules stated that her map was worthless if the counties said otherwise. His next call was to Gene Kowalski. Gene was a retired county surveyor, a gruff, bear of a man with a booming laugh and a deep-seated love for two things: solving puzzles and taking on petty tyrants. He had been one of Elias's father's oldest friends, and he still spoke of the man with reverence. "An HOA? Huh?" Gene barked into the phone when Elias explained the situation. "Bureaucratic bullies. They think a set of bylaws gives them sovereign authority. I'd love to help you knock 'em down a peg. Eli, for your dad." The following day, Elias made a formal, written request to Aspire Management for copies of all board meeting minutes from the last 2 years, as was his right under state law. He sent the request, as Julia instructed, via certified mail. While he waited, he met Gene for coffee. The old surveyor was practically vibrating with excitement. "This is better than a crossword puzzle," Gene said, tapping a thick finger on the HOA's violation notice. "They're citing a scenic easement. That's a legal designation. Son, it has to be recorded with the county when the plat is filed. They can't just draw a line on a piece of paper and call it an easement." Gene promised to go down to the county recorder's office himself. "I know that place like the back of my hand. I know the clerks. I know the filing system. If there's a discrepancy, I'll find it." A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived from Aspire. It contained the meeting minutes he'd requested. Elias spread the documents out on his table and began to read. Much of it was mundane discussions of lawn maintenance contracts, pool pump repairs, and holiday decoration rules. But as he got to the minutes from the last 6 months, he found what he was looking for: mentions of his property, and something else. Several paragraphs from a meeting in July were completely blacked out with a thick marker. The page was photocopied. The redaction, a stark, black block of censorship. A small, typed note was stapled to the corner, redacted to protect attorney-client privileged communication. Elias felt a jolt of adrenaline. What were they hiding? An innocent discussion about lawn care didn't require attorney-client privilege. This was something else. This was the heart of the matter. He was on the phone with Jean when his friend's voice suddenly boomed with the excitement of discovery. Jean was at the recorder's office. A county clerk, holding a massive, decades-old plat map book open for him. "I've got it. Eli, I've got the original developer's master plat for Oak Haven Estates. Section 3. It's right here in black and white." Jean's voice was muffled as he spoke to someone nearby. Then, he came back on the line, practically shouting with glee. "The scenic easement is on the map. Clear as day. And it ends a full 10 feet before your property line begins. The developer deeded a 10-foot buffer zone to the HOA as part of the common area. But your lot is completely separate from the easement itself. Their map is wrong. Not just a little wrong. Eli. Fraudulently wrong." Elias felt a wave of vindication so powerful, it almost buckled his knees. "Jean, you're a genius." "Wait. It gets better," Jean said, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "The clerk here, Marge, she remembers something. A few months ago, a slick-looking fella from a big developer was in here pulling these same maps. Oakwood Developers. She thinks the name was... He was asking all sorts of questions about that specific easement." Oakwood Developers. The name echoed in Elias's mind. A ghost he'd heard before. He frantically flipped through the redacted minutes. Then he saw it. In a section that hadn't been blacked out from a meeting in May, a motion to approve a landscaping bid from a company that also worked with Oakwood Developers. The connection was tenuous, but it was there. The pieces were clicking into place. A fraudulent map. A secret meeting with a developer. Redacted minutes. This wasn't about a few saplings or a view of the hills. This was bigger, and Carol Shaw was right in the middle of it. The fines, the lawyers, the intimidation. It was all a smokescreen. She wasn't trying to enforce a rule. She was trying to clear the way for a deal. The revelation of Carol's potential hidden motive transformed Elias's fight from a defensive battle into an offensive investigation. He and Jean now had a working theory Carol was colluding with Oakwood Developers, who wanted to purchase the scenic easement from the HOA to maximize the value of that land. They needed it to be completely unobstructed, which meant Elias's planned privacy screen had to go. The fraudulent map and the aggressive enforcement were tools to secure a clear title for the developer, with Carol likely standing to gain a handsome commission or kickback. "We need to see what's under those black bars." "Eli," Jean said during one of their evening calls, "state law is on your side. A homeowner has the right to review association records. They can claim attorney-client privilege, but they have to prove it. A vague mention of legal advice isn't enough. We can force their hand." Following Jean's guidance, Elias drafted a second, more forceful letter to the board. He cited the specific state statute governing access to HOA records and formally demanded an unredacted copy of the July minutes. He stated that, if they refused, he would file a petition in court to compel them, and would seek legal fees. He sent it, as always, via certified mail. Carol must have sensed his momentum, because her attacks became more desperate and personal. 2 days after she received his letter, another envelope arrived from Thorne, Cunningham and Associates. This one was thicker, more menacing. It was a formal notice of intent to file lien. The document stated that his unpaid fines and accumulated legal fees now exceeded $1,500, and if the balance was not paid in full within 30 days, the association would place a lien on his property. The legal jargon was dense. But the threat was crystal clear. This document was the first step in the foreclosure process. It was a direct assault on his ownership of the home his father had built. The home where he and Helen had built their life together. For the first time. Elias felt a cold knot of genuine fear tighten in his stomach. He sat at his kitchen table late into the night, staring at the notice. The rhythmic pressure of his own heartbeat, a dull drum behind his sternum. The next phase of Carol's assault was more insidious. She began a whisper campaign. During his infrequent trips to the local grocery store, Elias noticed the subtle shifts. Neighbors who used to offer a friendly wave now gave curt nods or looked away entirely. He overheard two women in the produce aisle talking, right on the corner. Just refuses to follow the rules. It's dragging down everyone's value, one said to the other, pointedly, not looking in his direction. Carol was painting him as a hostile recluse, a stubborn old man whose selfishness was hurting the entire community. It was a classic tactic: isolate the target, make them the enemy. The social pressure was a heavy, invisible weight. He felt like a stranger in the town where he'd lived his entire life. His phone calls with Julia were his lifeline. She's trying to get under your skin. Dad, she said, her voice sharp with a lawyer's clarity. She wants you to get angry, to make a mistake. Don't. Stick to the process. The facts are your shield. Meanwhile, Gene, invigorated by the chase, was conducting his own reconnaissance. He used his surveyor's eye to examine the neighborhood from the public street. One afternoon, he called Elias, his voice tight with discovery. Eli, you're not going to believe this. I was looking at the satellite view on the county GIS site, cross-referencing it with the official plat. You know, Arthur Eddington, the old guy on the board. Yes, he lives 2 streets over. Seems like a decent fellow. Decent. Maybe. But his brand new deck is a clear violation, Gene said with grim satisfaction. The one he just had built this summer. It extends 5 feet into the rear setback easement. It's a textbook violation of the same section of the CC&Rs they're using against you for obstructions. And you can bet your last dollar he got a permit for it, a permit signed off on by Carol's ACC. Elias was silent for a moment, processing the information. This is it, Eli. This is the silver bullet, Gene exclaimed. Selective enforcement. It's the Achilles heel of any HOA. You can show that Carol is ignoring a major violation by a board member while trying to foreclose on you over 12 saplings that aren't even on her land. It proves her bad faith. You can destroy her with this. Elias felt a surge of tactical excitement, quickly followed by a pang of unease. He thought of Arthur's face at the board meeting, the furrowed brow, the apologetic glance. Arthur was the only one who had seemed conflicted, the only one who looked like a man trapped in a system, not a willing participant. Exposing him felt wrong. It felt like punching down. Let me think about it, Gene, Elias said slowly. Think about what Gene grumbled. This is war. Eli, you don't win by being nice. The pressure was immense. The lien notice sat on his desk, a constant reminder of the stakes. The community's cold shoulders stung more than he cared to admit. The evidence of Arthur's violation felt like a powerful weapon, but wielding it would mean collateral damage to a man who might be his only potential ally. He was caught in a moral dilemma. How much was he willing to sacrifice to win? Just then, the doorbell rang. It was the mail carrier again, holding another certified letter. This one, however, was not from the HOA's law firm. The return address was Aspire Community Management. His second records request had borne fruit. Heart-pounding. He signed for the letter and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a cover letter from Tim, and behind it, a clean, unredacted copy of the minutes from the July board meeting. Their lawyers must have advised them that their claim of privilege was too weak to stand up in court. Elias's eyes scanned the page, flying past the mundane items until they landed on the previously blacked-out section. His breath caught in his throat. It was all there, in the dry, formal language of meeting minutes. President Shaw provided an update on preliminary discussions with Mr. Henderson of Oakwood Developers regarding the potential sale of the association-owned parcel designated as Scenic Easement C. Mr. Henderson reiterated, Oakwood's interest is contingent upon the delivery of a clear, unencumbered view corridor, which may require addressing existing landscaping encroachments on adjacent properties. President Shaw was authorized by the board to continue exploratory negotiations and consult with legal counsel regarding the necessary steps to clear title. There it was, the smoking gun. Elias photocopied the redacted page and the new, unredacted page and placed them side by side. The black box of lies next to the stark, white truth. He now had the motive, the evidence of a fraudulent map, and the proof of a cover-up. And, in his back pocket, he had the silver bullet of selective enforcement. The upcoming HOA annual meeting was in 10 days. He looked at the agenda, which had arrived in the mail yesterday. There was an open forum, 5 minutes per speaker, a large, digital timer would be on display. 5 minutes. That's all he would need. The Oakhaven Estates annual meeting was held in the multi-purpose room of the local elementary school, the only venue large enough to accommodate the expected turnout. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and suburban discontent. Elias, dressed in a simple sport coat and slacks, felt 100 pairs of eyes on him as he found a seat near the back. The whispers followed him, a low hiss of speculation. He was the reason for the special assessment, the cause of the legal fees, the man who was suing their community. He ignored them, his focus entirely on the worn leather portfolio resting on his lap. At the front of the room, Carol Shaw presided from behind a long table, flanked by the board and Tim from Aspire Management. She looked confident, radiant in a power-red blazer. This was her arena, her public court, and she clearly intended to use the meeting to solidify her narrative and cast him as the villain. A large projector screen hung behind her, and, to its right, a digital countdown clock was set to 5:00. Elias had signed up to speak. He was fourth on the list. He watched as the first 3 homeowners aired their grievances, a complaint about dog waste, a question about the pool schedule, a plea for a new pickleball court. Carol handled each with practiced ease, promising committees and reviews, deflecting and delaying. Finally, she called his name. The next speaker is Elias Vance. You have 5 minutes. The timer flashed to life, 0500. Elias walked to the podium, the rustle of papers and the low murmur of the crowd falling into a sudden, expectant hush. He placed his portfolio on the lectern and took a deep breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked out at the faces, some hostile, some curious, some just weary. He saw Arthur Eddington at the board table, his expression unreadable. He began, his voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. Good evening. My name is Elias Vance. Many of you know me only as the subject of numerous violation notices and the reason for the recent increase in legal fees. I'm here tonight to present the facts of my case, so that you, the members of this community, can judge them for yourselves. The timer clicked to 04:45. He used a remote to activate the projector. The first image that appeared was the HOA's notice of violation, its threatening language stark against the white screen. This is the document that started it all, Elias said. It claims my new trees are on a common area easement. This claim is the entire basis for over $2,000 in fines, and the lien that now threatens my home. The board has asserted that their map is the only one that matters. Timer 0410. He held up the old, framed map from his living room. This was my father's survey map from 1958. It shows the boundaries he established when he built my home. He then clicked the remote. A new image appeared on the screen, the modern, GPS-verified survey he had commissioned. And this is a new survey, certified by a licensed professional last month. They show the exact same property line. Timer 0330. Another click. A third map filled the screen, a high-resolution scan of the official master plat from the county recorder's office. He used a laser pointer to trace the boundary. And this is the official, legally binding plat map for our community on file with the county. As you can plainly see, the scenic easement in question ends a full 10 feet away from my property. The board's claim is, and has always been, factually incorrect. A murmur rippled through the audience. People were leaning forward, squinting at the screen. Timer 0250. Now, you might wonder why the board would pursue this so aggressively, even after I presented my survey to them weeks ago. You might ask, why would they refuse to even look at the evidence? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. In his peripheral vision, he saw Carol whisper something to the HOA's lawyer, who sat in the front row. He took out his notes. He saw the page detailing Arthur's deck violation. Jean's words echoed in his mind. This is war. Eli. He looked at Arthur, who was staring intently at the screen, his face pale. Elias saw not a co-conspirator, but an old man who looked trapped. He made his choice. He turned the page over and set it aside. This wasn't about destroying a man. It was about exposing a lie. Timer 0000. Perhaps the answer can be found in the board's own meeting minutes. Two documents appeared on the screen. Side by side, on the left, a page with a large black rectangle. On the right, the same page, clean and unredacted. This is the copy of the July minutes the board initially provided to me. And this is the unredacted copy I obtained after a formal legal request. He used the laser pointer to highlight the key sentence in the unredacted version. He read it aloud, his voice ringing with quiet authority. President Shaw was authorized by the board to continue exploratory negotiations with Oakwood developers regarding the potential sale of the scenic easement, contingent upon the delivery of a clear, unencumbered view corridor. Gasps erupted from the audience. The murmur grew into a loud buzz of angry, confused voices. This was never about a dozen small trees. Elias continued, his voice rising over the noise. This was about clearing a path for a secret real estate deal, a deal that President Shaw concealed from you, the homeowners. They used a fraudulent map to threaten my home, not to enforce a rule, but to enrich a developer. Timer 0045. Carol was on her feet. This is out of order. He is misrepresenting the facts. This was merely exploratory. Then, let me present one final fact, Elias said, cutting her off cleanly. He clicked the remote one last time. A new document filled the screen, Section 12.1.5 of the Oakhaven Estates CC&Rs. He read the sentence slowly and deliberately. In any discrepancy between the association's internally maintained maps or records and the official records filed with the county recorder's office, the official county records shall be deemed to prevail. He looked directly at Carol, whose face had gone from crimson with anger to ashen with panic. It was a flash, a brief, unguarded moment of pure fear, before she rebuilt her wall of indignation. He had trapped her. He had used her own rulebook to dismantle her entire case in front of the entire community. Your own rules state that the county map is law, Elias concluded. Turning back to the audience. The county map proves my innocence. The minutes prove the board's true motive. I leave you to draw your own conclusions. The timer on the wall blared, its red numbers flashing 0. Elias gathered his papers and walked back to his seat amidst a stunned, ringing silence. Then, the room exploded into chaos. The silence that followed the timer's final beep lasted only a moment before it was shattered by a tidal wave of noise. Homeowners were on their feet, shouting questions, demanding answers. The projector screen still displayed the damning text of Paragraph 12.1.5, a silent, irrefutable witness. All eyes were on Carol Shaw, who stood frozen behind the table, her face a mask of disbelief. The HOA's attorney was whispering furiously in her ear, but his words were lost in the din. Tim from Aspire Management looked horrified, his face pale as he stared down at his tablet, as if hoping it would offer an escape. The other two board members looked wildly between Carol and the angry faces in the crowd, clearly unprepared for this public dismantling. Then, a new voice cut through the chaos, quiet but firm. It was Arthur Eddington. He slowly got to his feet, leaning on the table for support, and cleared his throat into his microphone. The room, sensing a shift, gradually fell quiet again. "Madam President," Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly, but gaining strength with each word, "I believe Mr. Vance has raised some extremely serious points that are supported by our own governing documents." He looked not at Carol, but at his fellow homeowners. "We, the board, have a fiduciary duty to act in good faith and with transparency. It is clear, based on the evidence presented tonight, that we have failed in that duty." He took a deep breath. "Therefore, I move to immediately and retroactively rescind all fines, fees, and legal actions levied against Mr. Elias Vance concerning violation V 2023-114. "Second," a voice boomed from the audience. "Furthermore," Arthur continued, his gaze finally settling on Carol, "I move to formally censure President Shaw for acting in bad faith and for failing to disclose a significant conflict of interest regarding negotiations with Oakwood developers." "Second," another homeowner shouted. "And finally," Arthur said, his voice now ringing with conviction, "I move that this board authorize an immediate, independent, third-party audit of all board decisions and financial records for the past 24 months, with a special focus on all communications related to the so-called scenic easement C." The room erupted in a chorus of seconds and applause. Carol, finally finding her voice, banged her gavel on the table. "This is improper. These motions are not on the agenda. This meeting is adjourned." But no one was listening to her anymore. A homeowner near the front, a lawyer who lived down the street from Elias, stood up, according to Robert's Rules of Order and our own bylaws. A motion from the floor is permissible during the annual meeting. The motions have been made and seconded. They must be put to a vote. The crowd roared its approval. Carol's authority had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. The management agent, Tim, seeing the mutiny unfold, quietly packed his tablet into his bag. The board, except for Arthur, looked utterly lost. The vote was a landslide. All 3 of Arthur's motions passed with an overwhelming majority of homeowner votes. The censure was a public branding. The audit was a promise of more revelations to come. Elias watched it all unfold, a quiet observer of the revolution he had started. He felt no sense of triumph, only a profound sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted not just from his shoulders, but from the entire community. In the weeks that followed the annual meeting, the meticulously constructed world of Carol Shaw crumbled completely. The independent audit, uncovered a trail of emails between Carol and the developer that went far beyond exploratory negotiations, revealing discussions of a substantial finder's fee for Carol upon the successful sale of the easement. Faced with the evidence and a recall petition signed by over 80% of the homeowners, Carol resigned from the board and put her house on the market. She was gone within a month, her departure as quiet and swift as her reign had been loud and tyrannical. The rest of the board resigned in her wake, and a special election was held. Arthur Eddington was unanimously elected as the interim president, tasked with rebuilding the community's trust. One of his first official acts was to terminate the HOA's contract with Aspire Community Management and the law firm of Thorne, Cunningham and Associates. A certified letter arrived at Elias's home a week later. It was from the new management company, containing a formal apology from the board and a check reimbursing him for the cost of his survey. All fines had been expunged, and the intent to lien notice was officially withdrawn and voided with the county. The war was over. At the next monthly meeting, held in the same clubhouse where he had once been so arrogantly dismissed, Elias signed up to speak again. When interim president Arthur Eddington called his name, the room was filled with a respectful silence. Elias walked to the podium, not with a portfolio of evidence, but with a single sheet of paper. Last month, in this room, we saw how ambiguous rules and a lack of transparency can be used to harm a member of our community. Elias began, his voice calm and conciliatory. Winning my case was a personal victory, but it doesn't prevent the same thing from happening to someone else in the future. We have an opportunity to learn from this, to make our community stronger and fairer. He held up the paper. I have drafted a proposal for a new bylaw amendment. I call it the Boundary Verification Rule. It's very simple. It states that in any future dispute involving a property line or easement boundary between a homeowner and the association, the matter will be settled by a licensed, independent third-party surveyor. The surveyor will be chosen from a pre-approved county list and must be agreed upon by both the homeowner and the board. The cost of the survey will be borne by the association. The surveyor's findings will be legally binding on all parties. He looked around the room, at the new board, and at his neighbors. This rule removes ambiguity. It takes power out of the hands of the few and places it in the hands of impartial fact. It protects all of us, ensuring that no homeowner will ever again have to fight their own community to prove a fact that is already a matter of public record. When he finished, Arthur Eddington smiled from the board table. The chair would like to thank Mr. Vance for his thoughtful proposal. I will personally move to adopt this amendment. The motion was seconded, and it passed with a unanimous vote and a round of heartfelt applause. Elias hadn't just won. He had changed the rules of the game for everyone. He had established a new precedent for fairness. Later that evening, he was back in his garden, checking on the young arborvitae. They were healthy, thriving, their green shoots reaching for the sky. He knelt down, his hand resting on the cool earth where he and Helen had planned this small, living wall. The boundary was secure now, protected not just by iron stakes and property deeds, but by a community that had learned a hard lesson in humility and respect. He stood and looked back at the house, at the warm light glowing in the windows, above the fireplace. His father's old map hung in its frame, a silent testament to a legacy preserved. A sense of profound peace settled over him. The quiet, earned satisfaction of a problem solved, a structure made sound, a promise kept.